The Midwich Cuckoos by John Wyndham. Chapter 1. No Entry to Midwich. One of the luckiest accidents in my wife's life is that she happened to marry a man who was born on the 26th of September. But for that, we should both of us undoubtedly have been at home in Midwich on the night of the 26th to the 27th, with consequences which I have never ceased to be thankful she was spared. Because it was my birthday, however, and also to some extent because I had the day before received and signed a contract with an American publisher, we set off on the morning of the 26th for London, and a mild celebration. Very pleasant too. A few satisfactory calls, lobster and chablis at Wheeler's, Eustanov's latest extravaganza, a little supper, and so back to the hotel, where Janet enjoyed the bathroom with that fascination which other people's plumbing always arouses in her. Next morning, a leisurely departure on the way back to Midwich, a pause in train, which is our nearest shopping town, for a few groceries, then on along the main road through the village of Stouch, then the right-hand turn onto the secondary road for... But no. Half the road is blocked by a pole, from which dangles a notice, "Road closed." And in the gap beside it stands a policeman, who holds up his hand. So I stop. The policeman advances to the off side of the car. I recognise him as a man from train. "Sorry, sir, but the road is closed." "You mean I'll have to go around by the Opley Road?" "Afraid that's closed too, sir." "But..." There is the sound of a horn behind. "If you wouldn't mind backing off a bit to the left, sir." Rather bewildered, I do as he asks, and past us and past him goes an army 3-ton lorry with khaki youths leaning over the sides. "Revolution in Midwich?" I inquire. "Manoeuvres," he tells me. "The road's impassable." "Not both roads, surely. We live in Midwich, you know, Constable." "I know, sir, but there's no way there just now. If I was you, sir, I'd go back to train till we get it clear. Can't have parking here, 'cause of getting things through." Janet opens the door on her side and picks up her shopping bag. "I'll walk on, and you come along when the road's clear," she tells me. The constable hesitates, then lowers his voice. "Seeing as you live there, ma'am, I'll tell you, but it's confidential, like. 'Tisn't no use trying, ma'am. Nobody can't get into Midwich, and that's a fact." We stare at him. "But why on earth not?" says Janet. "That's just what they're trying to find out, ma'am. Now, if you was to go to the Eagle in train, I'll see you're informed as soon as the road's clear." Janet and I looked at one another. "Well," she said to the constable, "it seems very queer, but if you're quite sure we can't get through..." "I am that, ma'am. It's orders too. We'll let you know as soon as maybe." If one wanted to make a fuss, it was no good making it with him. The man was only doing his duty, and as amiably as possible. "Very well," I agreed. "Grayford's my name, Richard Grayford. I'll tell the Eagle to take a message for me in case I'm not there when it comes." I backed the car further until we were on the main road, and taking his word for it that the other Midwich road was similarly closed, turned back the way we had come. Once we were the other side of Stouch village, I pulled off the road into a field gateway. "This," I said, "has a very odd smell about it. Shall we cut across the fields and see what's going on?" "That policeman's manner was sort of queer too. Let's," Janet agreed, opening her door. What made it the more odd was that Midwich was, almost notoriously, a place where things did not happen. Janet and I had lived there just over a year then, and found this to be almost its leading feature. Indeed, had there been posts at the entrances to the village bearing a red triangle and below them a notice, "Midwich, do not disturb," they would have seemed not inappropriate. And why Midwich should have been singled out in preference to any one of 1,000 other villages for the curious events of the 26th of September seems likely to remain a mystery forever. For consider the simple ordinariness of the place. Midwich lies roughly 8 miles west-northwest of Train. The main road westward out of Train runs through the neighbouring villages of Stouch and Opley, from each of which secondary roads lead to Midwich. The village itself is therefore at the apex of a road triangle, which has Opley and Stouch at its lower corners, its only other highway being a lane which rolls in a Chestertonian fashion some 5 miles to reach Hickham, which is 3 miles north. At the heart of Midwich is a triangular green, ornamented by 5 fine elms and a white-railed pond. The war memorial stands in the churchyard corner of the green, and spaced out round the sides are the church itself, the vicarage, the inn, the smithy, the post office, Mrs. Welch's shop, and a number of cottages. Altogether, the village comprises some 60 cottages and small houses, a village hall, Kyle Manor, and the Grange. The church is mostly a perp and deck, but with a Norman west doorway and font. The vicarage is Georgian, the Grange Victorian. Kyle Manor has Tudor roots with numerous later graftings. The cottages show most of the styles which have existed between the two Elizabeths, but even more recent than the two latest county council cottages are the utilitarian wings that were added to the Grange when the military took it over for research. The existence of Midwich has never been convincingly accounted for. It was not in a strategic position to hold a market, not even across a packway of any importance. It appears at some unknown time simply to have occurred. The Domesday Survey notes it as a hamlet, and it has continued as little more, for the railway age ignored it, as had the coach roads and even the navigation canals. So far as is known, it rests upon no desirable minerals. No official eye ever saw it as a likely site for an aerodrome, or a bombing range, or a battle school. Only the ministry intruded, and the reconditioning of the Grange had little effect upon the village life. Midwich has, or rather had, lived and drowsed upon its good soil in Arcadian undistinction for 1,000 years, and there seemed, until the late evening of the 26th of September, no reason why it should not so to do for the next millennium too. This must not be taken, however, to mean that Midwich is altogether without history. It has had its moments. In 1931 it was the centre of an untraced outbreak of foot and mouth disease, and in 1916 an off-course Zeppelin unloaded a bomb which fell in a ploughed field and fortunately failed to explode. And before that it hit the headlines, well, anyway, the broadsheets, when Black Ned, a second-class highwayman, was shot on the steps of the Scythe and Stone Inn by Sweet Polly Parker. And although this gesture of reproof appears to have been of a more personal than social nature, she was nevertheless much lauded for it in the ballads of 1768. Then too there was the sensational closure of the nearby St Accius Abbey, and the redistribution of the Brethren for reasons which have been a subject of intermittent local speculation ever since it took place in 1493. Other events include the stabling of Cromwell's horses in the church, and a visit by William Wordsworth, who was inspired by the abbey ruins to the production of one of his more routine commendatory sonnets. With these exceptions, however, recorded time seems to have flowed over Midwich without a ripple, nor would the inhabitants, save perhaps some of the youthful in their brief premarital restlessness, have it otherwise. Indeed, but for the vicar and his wife, the Zellerbys at Kyle Manor, the doctor, the district nurse, ourselves, and of course the researchers, they had most of them lived there for numerous generations in a placid continuity which had become a rite. During the day of the 26th of September, there seems to have been no trace of a foreshadow. Possibly Mrs. Brant, the blacksmith's wife, did feel a trace of uneasiness at the sight of 9 magpies in one field, as she afterwards claimed, and Miss Ogle, the postmistress, may have been perturbed on the previous night by a dream of singularly large vampire bats. But if so, it is unfortunate that Mrs. Brant's omens and Miss Ogle's dreams should have been so frequent as to nullify their alarm value. No other evidence has been produced to suggest that on that Monday, until late in the evening, Midwich was anything but normal, just, in fact, as it had appeared to be when Janet and I set off for London, and yet, on Tuesday the 27th, we locked the car, climbed the gate, and started over the field of stubble, keeping well into the hedge. At the end of that we came to another field of stubble, and bore leftwards across it slightly uphill. It was a big field with a good hedge on the far side, and we had to go further left to find a gate we could climb. Halfway across the pasture, beyond, brought us to the top of the rise, and we were able to look out across Midwich. Not that much of it was visible for trees, but we could see a couple of wisps of greyish smoke lazily rising, and the church spire sticking up by the elms. Also in the middle of the next field I could see 4 or 5 cows lying down, apparently asleep. I am not a countryman, I only live there, but I remember thinking rather far back in my mind that there was something not quite right about that. Cows folded up, chewing cud, yes, commonly enough, but cows lying down fast asleep, well, no. But it did not do more at the time than give me a vague feeling of something out of true. We went on. We climbed the fence of the field where the cows were, and started across that too. A voice halloed at us, away on the left. I looked round and made out a khaki-clad figure in the middle of the next field. He was calling something unintelligible, but the way he was waving his stick was without doubt sign for us to go back. I stopped. "Oh, come on, Richard, he's miles away," said Janet impatiently, and began to run on ahead. I still hesitated, looking at the figure who was now waving his stick more energetically than ever, and shouting more loudly, though no more intelligibly. I decided to follow Janet. She had perhaps 20 yards start of me by now, and then, just as I started off, she staggered, collapsed without a sound, and lay quite still. I stopped dead. That was involuntary. If she had gone down with a twisted ankle or simply tripped, I should have run on to her. But this was so sudden and so complete that for a moment I thought, idiotically, that she'd been shot. The stop was only momentary. Then I went on again. Dimly I was aware of the man away on the left still shouting, but I did not bother about him. I hurried towards her, but I did not reach her. I went out so completely that I never even saw the ground come up to hit me.